Let's talk about the real world for a moment, shall we? Where you're not some wonderful lone wolf hero, but you're part of a team and you play your position, because that's what America is, Mr. Jeffries. It's one big team. Now, this might be difficult for you to grasp, but I am a patriot. And a patriot is one who makes the right moral choice. Sometimes it takes a strong man to make that choice.
All right, welcome back. Welcome back to the Sunday Wire. I'm your host, Patrick Henningsen. We're streaming out live on the Alternate Current Radio Network and also the 21st Century Wired.com. And before the break, we were talking about a number of issues, lockdowns. We're talking about the new vaccine potential mandate coming in some of these countries. And we were hinting about the U.S. elections. And so we're going to get a little bit deeper into that in this segment. And we have a special guest joining us this week. He's joining us on the live link from the state of Florida in the U.S. His name is Tim Canova, former congressional candidate, U.S. congressional candidate. And Tim has had personal experience with the issue of election integrity and also the issue of election fraud, in fact. And he's joining us now, is hopefully going to share some of his experience and wisdom in this area here on the Sunday Wire this week. Thank you for joining us, Tim.
Thank you, Patrick, for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, no, it's great. We're really looking forward to this conversation, Tim, because I've been following your campaign. You've been campaigning heavily in the last couple of years because of what happened to you in the congressional election in Florida against Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who was a big power broker within the Democratic Party, at least at the time she was, before the email leaks, the Podesta leaks, and the other things that came out at the time. But just give us a quick synopsis, Tim, of those who might not be familiar with your situation and how that unfolded and what you managed to get in terms of redress or not. After challenging the election result there, what you discovered. Just walk us through how that story began in your campaign.
Sure, I'd be glad to. I had never been a political candidate before. I had worked on Capitol Hill many years ago for a couple of years for a U.S. senator who passed away some years ago. His name was Paul Tsongas. He was a Democrat from Massachusetts. But I'm a lawyer, and I've been a law professor for more than 20 years and was very politically engaged on a number of issues. My research was skewed towards central banking and the Federal Reserve, international trade, international financial issues. And I was very critical of the Trans-Pacific Partnership proposal that the Obama administration was putting forward. And in 2015, I got involved with the Citizens Trade Campaign, trying to advocate against the TPP for the way that it would undermine national sovereignty and empower large multinational corporations. And that got all of us looking at our local members of Congress. And we tried to meet with Debbie Wasserman Schultz, our Congresswoman, to no avail. She ended up being the only member of Florida's House delegation on the Democratic side to vote to fast track the TPP. And folks wanted to start challenging her in a primary. It's a heavily gerrymandered district, which means it's skewed towards one side. And I think it's about 40% Democrat, 30% independent, and about 25% Republican. So we tried to find a Democrat who would challenge her, some labor folks and environmentalists. We were behind this effort with me. And we discovered she had taken $330,000 in campaign donations from big corporations that wanted the TPP. And then as we dug a bit deeper, we saw she had been taking millions of dollars from big Wall Street banks, big pharma, you name it, any big corporate interest you could imagine. And she'd gotten away with it for many years without challenge because it is a heavily Democratic district. Nobody would challenge her in a primary, and the Republicans never stood a chance in the general election. The long and short of it is I got talked into doing this. I had been a Bernie Sanders supporter, and as we saw how Wasserman Schultz was leading the Democratic National Committee, the DNC at the time, to try to stop Sanders, it gave me some extra motivation. Jumped in early 2016, and the campaign immediately went viral. I'll just sort of cut to the chase and give you how it turned out. We raised almost $4 million in small donations online. Over 200,000 people across the country donated an average of $17 each. And we took that money and plowed it right back into the district. We had 4 field offices in the district, which is really unheard of. We had an enormous grassroots ground game, knocking on 12,000 doors a week. And meanwhile, Wasserman Schultz was just sinking. She was disgraced that summer when WikiLeaks disclosed those DNC emails. Wasserman Schultz had to step down as chair of the Democratic National Committee at the convention itself. And our campaign was surging. Our internal numbers, based on, again, 12,000 door knocks a week, much greater sample size than any of these polls where pollsters call 600 people on the phone. And anyway, our numbers showed us crushing her. Our experience on the ground was similar. And when the polls closed on election night, within an hour, they declared her the victor by 13 percentage points. And I should mention that the day before the election, a local NBC television station had up on their website a preview of the next day's elections with all of the elections zeroed out since no votes had actually been counted yet. No ballots had been counted. But our race had Wasserman Schultz beating me by about 13 percentage points. And, we called up and said, what's going on? And they took it right down. And that same, all the stations have a direct line, so to speak, to the supervisor's office and the electronic voting system. So when we lost by 13 points, it seemed very fishy for a number of reasons. And a bunch of election experts around the country started contacting me and telling me they were analyzing the numbers precinct by precinct and overall votes. And they concluded that the numbers, the results were mathematically implausible, to say the least. So I put in a public records request to inspect the paper ballots and to inspect what's called the digital scanned images. Because when you vote here in Florida and in much of the U.S., you vote on paper ballots, but they're not counted by hand in public. The paper ballots are put through a scanning machine. The scanning machine can take a digital image and it tabulates the vote when it takes the image, or when you put it through the scanning, it tabulates the vote. The problem is these scanning machines, you can't look at the software. They're proprietary. They're the private property and trade secrets of shadowy companies like Dominion that we're seeing now in Michigan and Wisconsin and half a dozen or more battleground states in the presidential election. The machines here in Florida are made by a company called ES&S, Election Systems and Software, equally shadowy, owned by a private equity firm in Omaha, Nebraska. And, it's very difficult to learn much more beyond that because it's not a publicly held corporation. So we put in this public records request. The supervisor immediately said they never took digital scanned images, which seemed very fishy. But we were undeterred and we said, okay, we'll take a look at the paper ballots, please. We thought we would look in about a dozen key precincts out of 200 precincts here. If they matched up, the vote is verified, and I would have just dropped the whole thing. If they don't match up, we have a problem. These public records requests, we have every right under law to see these materials, and yet the supervisor stonewalled us for half a year. I finally, after 3 formal requests through lawyers and experts, I finally filed a lawsuit, and that suit was filed in June of 2017, so almost a year after the primary election. And while the lawsuit was pending, the supervisor of elections, at the time, Brenda Snipes was her name, ordered the destruction of every ballot that had been cast in Broward County. And that is, those are major legal violations under state and federal law, including felonies punishable by up to 5 years in prison. She didn't just destroy the ballots, she concealed that fact from me, my lawyers, and the court for another almost 3 months. We took her deposition, sworn deposition in the public records case that, my lawsuit. So sworn videotape deposition in which she admitted to the ballot destruction. The judge granted me summary judgment, which essentially opened the door to allow us to receive our attorney's fees, but nothing else. And at the end of the day, the supervisor claimed, those digital scanned images we said we didn't have, we do have. So you couldn't believe anything coming out of their mouths at that point. When the judge ruled for us, he issued a 10-page order, which essentially found her culpable of violating all of these state and federal criminal statutes. We were hoping there'd be criminal prosecutions at that point. And we had a Republican governor, and now I'm talking about here in Broward County, this was Democratic Party fraud that was going on, election rigging. The Republican governor seemed to have no interest in prosecuting, even starting an investigation. Would have been an open and shut investigation. Like I said, we had all the evidence that they actually destroyed the ballots. And I was told that the governor didn't want to get involved because he was running for the U.S. Senate, and he was afraid that of doing something that would rock the boat. Brenda Snipes was an African-American woman of advanced years. Of course, I thought, why not just fire her, investigate her, and appoint, if you're really concerned about race or gender, just appoint another African-American female to replace her. But let's get on to the business of cleaning up this election swamp. Well, that didn't happen. My lawyer spoke with the acting U.S. attorney, Benjamin Greenberg, for almost 2 hours. Greenberg seemed very excited about prosecuting. When I spoke to him on the phone at that point, after all, again, an open and shut case. But Greenberg went up to Washington, D.C. for a week of meetings at the Justice Department, including with Rod Rosenstein, the Deputy Attorney General, who had already appointed Robert Mueller to investigate the Trump administration, the Trump campaign for alleged collusion with Russia. And Greenberg came back to Florida after a week of meetings at the Justice Department, and suddenly no investigation. So there's never been a prosecution here. I ran again in 2018 as an independent, had a real spirited campaign. I thought as an independent we'd have a decent chance to win a three-way race, given the demographics of this district and Wasserman Schultz's continuing unpopularity. There had been a Republican news outlet that published a report that there was a poll that was being suppressed that showed Wasserman Schultz and myself tied at 34% each in a dead heat, with the Republican back at 13% and about 18% undecided. So we thought we had a good chance in that home stretch, and we were certainly gaining a lot of momentum at the end. The polls closed. She was declared the victor, and I was pinned down at a very unlikely low percentage, 5%, they said. And what was striking about it, it wasn't just 5% of the overall vote. It was 5% for every single demographic group: Black, white, Hispanic, male, female, Republican, Democrat, Independent, and every precinct, regardless of size or location in the district. One of the nation's leading scientists in mathematical science, or computational science, I guess you would call it, Dr. David Bader, said the results were as unlikely as winning the lottery every day for a year. So I made a lot of noise. I was arguing that if they got away with this, they would rig the primaries again in 2020 against Sanders. I should say that those who studied this, both of my elections statistically, said that they could only be explained by a manipulation of the software, and it would only take manipulating a few lines of the source code to get the results that we saw. And they had similar analysis and charts or graphs of the election results in many primaries in which Sanders somehow lost to Hillary Clinton when he was ahead in the polls and the exit polls. And sure enough, it certainly seems like they did it to Sanders again in 2020 with Joe Biden in third and fourth place in many polls. And somehow Biden won 10 out of the 14 Super Tuesday states, and that was really the end of that primary contest at that point. And now, of course, major concerns that the machines were manipulated in the state of Michigan, maybe Wisconsin, and maybe half a dozen other battleground states where they used the Dominion voting system. I spoke to my experts just to verify. I said, we have ES&S system here, not Dominion. And they said, doesn't matter. They have the same functionality, the same kind of fractionalized voting tabulation system that could be manipulated to engineer any election result. They could cap any candidate at any percent they want, whether it's 43% or 5%.
What you're talking about, very similar to what they uncovered as well with Wall Street and embezzling from banks by taking fractions of pennies, but doing that transaction millions of times, exactly. and then shipping that money off to some account in the Cayman Islands or something like that. So knowing what you know, and also the experience you've had is unbelievable, because you had the evidence and they haven't prosecuted. So what's going on, Tim? Is there a bipartisan open secret or something with regards to election fraud where both sides of the establishment don't want to go there because each side wants to reserve that for themselves as and when they need it?
I think that's a very good way to characterize it, and it's the conclusion I reached a while ago. My lawyer, a Republican, because of course when I had an election lawyer, when I needed one running against the head of the DNC, I couldn't find a Democrat election lawyer who I could trust and who wasn't conflicted out. My Republican election lawyer was well connected, and I said to him, we've got all the evidence. The Republicans for years have been complaining about Brenda Snipes, Broward County, voter fraud. We have her, ready. I mean, we've done all the legwork. Why don't they prosecute? I don't understand it. And he didn't understand it. And he got back to me a couple of weeks later and told me they were not going to lift a finger to help me because they would rather have Debbie Wasserman Schultz than me in Congress. So this is the Republican establishment. And he said it was because they have the same friends as Debbie. Friends? What do you mean? Well, the corporate lobbyists and political consultants that represent the huge corporate interests that dominate Florida politics, both and these corporate interests contribute tens of millions of dollars, actually over the course of the last 20 or 30 years, hundreds of millions of dollars to both parties. The same corporate interests will contribute heavily to both parties. So they own both parties in many ways. There seems to be evidence that the reason Hillary Clinton did not contest in 2016 in some key states where it was close, like Wisconsin, I believe, was that if they had done a real recount, it would have come out that the Democrats were rigging machines in many counties in that state. So I don't know. Does this happen on a county-by-county basis around the country? Is it only in key elections? Nobody really knows the answers to these questions. The United States is one of the only countries that calls itself a democracy that has not banned these electronic voting machines. I know I point to Britain many times. I saw photographs of ballots being counted both for the Brexit vote and then more recent elections for Parliament. And in those photographs, you see people sitting at a counting table, and there's somebody representing Labour, somebody the Tory, somebody the Liberal Party, and the ballot is passed down the table, and each counter marks their sheet and then it's time for the next ballot. And while it's labor intensive and might take some time, it's completely transparent and verifiable. And in this country, our system is nowhere near anything like that. And then there's, the question of Donald Trump. He is not, you could say, beloved by even the Republican establishment. And did Trump and his team not see this coming? I have a hard time believing that. They had their eyes on Broward County, not just in my race and what happened to me in 2016 and 18, but also the race for governor and U.S. senator in Florida, also both crash landed in Broward County. So they've had time to prepare for this. There's lots of speculation that they have a lot of the evidence they need of the computer programs, that maybe they've even seized the servers, which amazingly enough for Dominion are overseas. So I think this presidential election is far from over, even though the American news media has said from really almost day one that Trump lost and Biden won. But there's a full month before the Electoral College essentially the members of the Electoral College are selected. So during that month, I imagine there'll be plenty of court challenges and who knows, maybe going right up to the Supreme Court.
I think the only person I have seen in America, at least in government, who's made this an issue was probably Tulsi Gabbard, who put forward a piece of legislation securing America's elections. Yeah, go ahead.
No, that's right. There are a few others. I was surprised to learn recently, Elizabeth Warren, Amy Klobuchar, Ron Wyden, all Democratic senators who apparently had written letters to the election authorities asking for investigation of Dominion. And that happened a couple of years ago, that those senators weighed in and were worried about Dominion. Now they're awfully quiet about Dominion since making a stink of it now could endanger the purported Joe Biden win.
And the other thing is the predicate, if you will, for the 2020 election was mail-in ballots were necessary because of the pandemic. And it's never happened in history. This is unprecedented that you would just flood residents with mail-in ballots. And a lot of critics said ahead of time that this really opens things up to potential fraud, and the system hasn't had to deal with that, or isn't equipped to deal with that. In also removing signature verifications in Georgia and I believe Pennsylvania. There were lots of lawsuits that were filed by Democrat activist groups and PACs before. I think 300 lawsuits in total to remove the checks and verification checks for postal votes, mail-in ballots. And lo and behold, that narrative was set up ahead of time. We had the same problem in the UK with the last election as well, and a few key regions where there was a problem with the mail-in vote, and a lot of people pointed to that as a potential swing problem that might have swung the election in favor of the Tories, for instance. But so I mean, from that point of view, what are your thoughts about this kind of using COVID as the kind of the justification for creating a situation that really leaves the whole electoral process up to incredible risk of fraud?
It's a fraudulent argument they made that COVID justified any of this. For weeks now, many weeks, the shutdowns kind of slowly started to be lifted. People are going to grocery stores and car washes and you name it, wearing their masks and social distancing, but going to vote in person is somehow too dangerous for them to do. So the situation here is that these mail-in ballots in the past, those who requested mail-in ballots got mail-in ballots. But here they sort of shifted it so that mail-in ballots were just mailed out en masse in some states, even to folks who were not requesting it. And then there are reports that on election night, when people kind of went to sleep at 2 or 3 in the morning, I think Trump had spoken at around 2 in the morning, and he had warned, watch out for 4 a.m. Dumps of ballots. And then we wake up and there were reports that at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning in some of these key states, there were major dumps, and reports that I think I read that in Michigan, 138,000 mail-in ballots were flooded into the system, and they were like all Biden votes, 100% Biden votes. And what's even more or as suspicious, you could say, is that not just that there were no votes for Donald Trump, but these ballots, people voted for Joe Biden, but they didn't bother voting for United States Senate or congressional races or governor races. None of the down ballots races were votes cast. So there's so many reasons to be suspicious of this, and there needs to be major investigations, and the courts need to do their job and to determine the facts of what happened. And I would imagine that is where things are heading this coming week in many ways.
And so you have the media is really on a full court press right now in the U.S. The New York Times said this is the safest, most secure election in history. All these election officials nationwide agree. This sounds like the intelligence community's assessment of Russiagate. Everyone agrees that this was the securest election. So that's all going on. And there's this real push to basically put down on Twitter, on social media, put down any questions or bring up the issue of election fraud, saying it's not true. They're even censoring the president on this issue. And at the same time, they're really pushing this idea of Joe Biden's the next president, and why doesn't Donald Trump concede and help to facilitate the peaceful transition of power? What are your thoughts on what's happening right now?
Well, the media and the New York Times, they had that banner headline, I think, on Wednesday of this past week, saying no election official in the country says there was any fraud whatsoever. I guess they forgot to interview the chairman of the Federal Election Commission, who said that there was significant fraud all over the place and it's an illegitimate election. But what we see, the media sort of in unison, is very reminiscent of what we've seen for 4 years, where they were convinced and tried their best to convince the entire American population that the Russians had colluded with the Trump campaign in 2016. They were in unison that Trump was cooked on the impeachment over a phone call to a Ukrainian president. And they were wrong in all of that. So you've got to ask what is going on with the media. You've got 5 huge corporate conglomerates that now own 90% of the TV, radio, cable, broadcast, and print media in this country as a result of deregulation acts signed way back in the 1990s by Bill Clinton when he was president, and by a complete lack of antitrust enforcement during the Bush years and the Obama years. So it doesn't take that much coordination, perhaps, for 5 major or 6 major conglomerates to weigh in, and they might all have their own reasons that they want Trump out of office, and could be ties to big pharma, Wall Street, the intelligent parts of the intelligence community. And we see the same pattern in big tech social media with the censorship that you've been mentioning, where they're actually censoring the tweets of President Trump and deplatforming others who dare to question. And I should say, not just question their narrative on the election, but to also question their narrative on the pandemic as well. This has been going on all year. If you wanted to have a discussion about masks, what's the science behind the masks? There's some science that suggests it doesn't help whatsoever, and maybe it makes things worse. There's science that suggests that. Can we not have that discussion? Nope, not allowed to have that discussion. Can we have a discussion about hydroxychloroquine and other therapeutics? No, Donald Trump mentioned it, so it's got to be fake. It's got to be, part of his nefarious agenda to kill everybody. And it's been this way on the shutdowns, on vaccines. So, the First Amendment that guarantees freedom of speech and freedom of the press is the First Amendment. It's not the Second or the Fourth or the 10th. It's the First Amendment. It's first for a reason, that you need a marketplace of ideas, a marketplace for information, to have a real democracy where citizens are involved in asking questions and reasoning through the issues and the candidates together. And this is a major impediment to democracy. So here we are in 2020 where and I should say it's not just 2020. We started to see this in recent years. It doesn't look like much of a democracy at all. There's very little confidence and trust in the election results. And it's not just this election. It's been this way for quite a while now, and it gets worse each election cycle. And there's not much in the way of free speech and vibrant public debate on all kinds of issues. So this is a country that looks much more like an authoritarian system with where politics is really manufactured and handed down with very limited choices for the population.
So that's, take the partisan argument away, and you just think the fact that, look at the results of the election, whether you think there was election fraud or not, and Joe Biden had hundreds of thousands of votes fed through scanner machines or not, you have a divided country. You definitely don't have a clear mandate either way for either party. It's more or less split down the middle. So we just went through 4 years of half the country has been convinced by the media, who you just mentioned, and for the reasons you've just mentioned, that the Russians somehow installed the president into the White House, which disenfranchises everybody who voted for Trump in 2016. And now you have a potential situation after 2020 where you have half the country that has lost faith and doesn't believe that the elections in the United States are free and fair. And you know, you don't have to be a scholar to look back in history to see where that could lead in the very near future, if that's indeed what happens. Therefore, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, you'd think that it would be in everyone's best interest to get to the bottom of what happened in this election. But I don't see that happening. That's the problem, the dangerous problem I see, Tim.
Yeah, I think it is a dangerous problem. 72 million Americans, we're told, voted for Trump this time around, 10 million more than last time in 2016. And 70% of those who voted for Trump, according to at least one public opinion survey that's being widely reported, 70% of them believe the election had been stolen from them. And yet you don't see major or any kind of rioting from that side. They're talking about using the courts and the rule of law to determine what happened, and doing that now before anyone concedes that Joe Biden is the president-elect legitimately. But it'll be interesting to watch how things go in the coming days. If, as I suspect, there's a chance could happen that Donald Trump could still win this election. Will there be violence in the streets? Are those big, powerful interests that are behind the campaigns against Trump, that are behind the media and the election voting machine industry, the billionaires even that are behind all of this, do they want harmony, or are they going to be pushing for almost like a civil war and civil unrest in the streets? That all has yet to be determined. And where the military and the National Guard is on all of this. There's a chain of command. So there's lots of issues that are in play. I don't think I've ever lived through a time of more uncertainty than right now.
Just before we go to the end of the segment, Basil, Valentine, do you have anything you want to ask Tim Canova on this issue?
Hi, Tim. Good to be with you. I noticed you mentioned the name Paul Tsongas there. Did you work for his campaign? I always rather liked him. He was a very different breed of Democrat from the ones around today.
I worked on his legislative staff in Washington, D.C. on Capitol Hill. So I wasn't involved in his political campaigns. Mostly it was acting as a legislative assistant and advising on a number of policy issues, including economic regulatory types of issues. There was a whole bunch of deregulation bills that were always coming up during that period of time. He ran for president in 1992 in the Democratic primary, and I think he had won the New Hampshire primary, which New Hampshire is a state right next to Massachusetts. So it wasn't that much of a surprise, but he got a big boost. And for a while, it seemed like a real race between him and Bill Clinton. And I think Jerry Brown was running from California. Paul was a nice man, a decent guy. He unfortunately passed away from, I think it was complications from a type of cancer. His widow, Nikki, who was always a very smart woman, very nice woman. She ran and won his old congressional seat from before he was a senator. She served in Congress for a number of terms, and I think retired from that job just a few years ago, not many years ago.
Yes, as you say, he was a nice guy. That's probably why he didn't get anywhere in the presidency. The list of, really good candidates who could have gone a long way in presidential elections, I'm sure includes people like Dennis Kucinich on the Democrat side and Ron Paul on the Republican side, both of whom I think were shafted, for want of a better expression, both at the ballot box, but before they even got to the ballot box, by the media, who refused to acknowledge them as top-tier candidates. So the way that the American system is rigged is, in the first instance, before any vote has been cast, it's by who the media determines to be, in inverted commas, serious candidates.
Yes.
And thereafter, should, by any chance, like Ron Paul did, those candidates that the corporate media ignore actually make it, to the debate stage and then to the primaries themselves. Mm-hmm. Then, of course, the jiggery-pokery has to come into play. I mean, as you said, I was enormously suspicious of what went on this year on Super Tuesday. But Bernie was cruising to victory.
Yes.
And Biden's campaign was on a life support machine, which he appeared to be on himself as well, know.
But in addition to a life support machine, perhaps a rigged electronic voting machine.
North Carolina went his way. And then, the entire Democratic field folded and chucked their cards in with him.
Yeah.
But it still wasn't enough to put him in front in any, meaningful, genuine poll.
Yeah.
And then, like you say, he won 12 out of 14 on Super Tuesday from nowhere, and it was all over. And it was very, very strange.
Yeah.
Put it that way.
Absolutely.
Very strange.
I would like to add just one name. You named a number of really great candidates in Ron Paul and Dennis Kucinich. There was also Paul Wellstone, a fantastic U.S. senator who had defied the Bush administration in opposing the Iraq war at a time when Wellstone was up for re-election and started surging in the polls until he died in an unfortunate small plane crash with his wife and daughter in the plane as well. So there's all kinds of crossroads we've seen in American politics, and they always seem to prevent a popular people's kind of a candidate from emerging.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we're still scratching our head about what happened last Super Tuesday. I just still can't work that one out. But now it makes more sense looking at what we've just witnessed in the last couple of weeks. It makes perfect sense, in fact. But so anyway, last words, Tim. I mean, where do we stand right now here? I've never seen any deep look like we're seeing right now at companies like Dominion, for instance, at the technology, looking at the software, the supposed glitches, people auditing the source code right now. There's tons of people out there independently looking at this. I've never seen an effort like this, even though it's being suppressed by the mainstream media. I've never seen it this developed, like people really looking at this issue in a serious way, like we've never have before. Do you think there's a chance that some resolution, some redress might come out of this situation? Do they have enough time legally? Just your final thoughts on where things stand right now with the legal challenges that the White House is making.
I think there is ample time for the legal challenges to election results to go forward in any state where there's been major irregularities, whether it's the flood of the absentee ballots, the mail-in ballots without verification, or any state that had a Dominion voting system at this point. I do think there's ample time. I find it exciting, and I'm hopeful that for the first time, these electronic voting systems are coming under major scrutiny. And yes, it's true, the media will ignore that completely and downplay it. And I think it's shameful that Democrats are downplaying it. If it were reversed and Donald Trump was the winner and Joe Biden was in second place, and there was evidence that electronic voting machines had manipulated the vote for Trump, you could bet the Democrats would be up on their high horses complaining about it. But, because the outcome is the way it is right now, or how they think it is, they're circling the wagons and saying, no, it's impossible to rig these elections. And the hypocrisy is amazing. They spent 4 years saying that our elections were vulnerable to hacking from Russia, and now suddenly they're the most perfect, secure election system. When I, over 4 years, over a 4-year period, I've been trying to wake people up to these facts. And most people want to just sort of believe that the election system is secure the way they would want to believe in Santa Claus, I suppose. And I had the will, but not the means, you could say, to change things. I think Donald Trump has both the will and the means. I don't think he's about to give up. and nor should he at this point. There are too many people who voted for him who he owes it to them to see this through. And I think we could be in for quite a lot of startling developments between now and, well, in the next few weeks. And don't forget that in 2000, Al Gore was proclaimed the winner, and for something like more than 30 days, people were referring to him as the president-elect, and he never became president.
Yeah, 37 days, and not far from where you are either. Right. That controversy went down. Is there still any shadow from that, Tim, in Florida from the 2000 election, or what are people's feelings about 2000?
Well, it does seem very far in the past, and there are a lot of voters who were not very old. They were young children, you could say, when that happened. So there's not a lot of memory of it. It's an interesting watershed election, I think, because it discredited paper ballots to such a degree, and the federal government came in with multi-billion-dollar packages to subsidize the growth of the electronic voting machine industry. And I believe they really reached the wrong conclusions about paper ballots when that happened. I suppose the right conclusion would be to not design paper ballots where you've got to punch a hole through a piece of paper. You don't have to go from that all the way to having electronic voting machines that have proprietary software that you can't inspect, and they have back doors where hackers can get in from anywhere in the world.
Yeah, no, that's so important that you point that out, that the Florida controversy was the pretext for the massive rollout of electronic voting systems, ironically, or not, depending on which. But Tim, fantastic to hear from you and to get some of the details of your case and your battle there with the Democratic Party machine in Broward County, Florida. And and we just want to thank you for all your efforts on this front and continuing efforts as well to raise awareness on this important issue.
Thank you, Patrick. I appreciate being with you and wish you and your listeners all the best. I know these are tough times and confusing times in Britain and elsewhere. I'm certainly hoping these shutdowns end pretty soon, and that there will really be a return to some kind of normal life as we maybe could define it pre-pandemic. So yes. I wish you all the best, and thank you for your interest and for having me on.
No, thank you very much. There he goes, ladies and gentlemen. That's Tim Canova. If you go to our show page, we've linked to his Twitter feed up at 21st Century Wire. So follow Tim on social media, and you'll see a lot of interesting posts and stuff that he's doing. So I do recommend that heavily. Look, we're going to take a short break and come back for a final segment of Overdrive. I'm here with Basil Valentine. This is the Sunday Wire. Stick around. We'll be right back.
Lawman is putting into my running.